I'd like to read the opening lines of Dr. Seuss's book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. Congratulations, today's your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own, and you know what you know. And you are the guy who'll decide where to go. How do you feel when you hear these lines? Are you the guy who knows what you know and can decide where to go? This is Stories Seldom Told. I am Smitha Tharoor. I'd like to introduce Anthony Swann. Anthony Swann became the first sitting teacher ever to be appointed to the State Board of Education by the Governor of Virginia in the United States in 2021. Anthony has been in education for 16 years as a classroom teacher and instructional coach. He has had the privilege of teaching every elementary grade except kindergarten. I don't know how you do it, Anthony. Anthony is currently the assistant principal of Monterey Elementary School in Roanoke, Virginia. In 2018, Anthony began a program entitled Guys with Ties to teach boys the importance of honesty, integrity, and character inside and outside of the classroom. I'd love to know more about that when we chat further, Anthony. But hold on a minute, listeners. In 2021, Anthony was elected by his peers to be the Teacher of the Year in 2 different schools. Now, if those accolades were not enough, Anthony then became the 2021 Virginia State Teacher of the Year. Wow. Congratulations, Anthony, for that huge honor. I'm eager to hear your stories and learn how much you have achieved in such a short space of time. So thank you so much, Anthony Swann, for joining me today to share your stories of unconscious bias.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
It's early in the morning for you, Anthony, because you're about to go into school and start your workday. So I appreciate your giving me your time. We're talking about unconscious bias. And so before you even hear your stories, Anthony, what do you understand by unconscious bias for you personally?
That is a great question. Unconscious bias to me means that you have a type of feeling towards either a person or a thing or a situation that you may not understand, but it causes you to think in a certain type of way, and it has your mindset. 9 times out of 10, personally, it's like a negative mindset, but then it changes once you realize that you do have those unconscious biases. Then it helps you to grow as a person and as a professional.
How lovely. So what does that look like for you then? I'd love to hear your stories, Anthony.
So I was on my district committee of cultural competency, and within cultural competency, it teaches professionals about the unconscious biases. It teaches professionals about how we all have those microaggressions. And so because I was on that committee, I learned a lot, and I was able to help train some of the teachers within that particular district. And so it helped me to grow as a professional with the things that I have experienced personally, so that I'll know how to better serve.
Right. And so when you're talking about your experiences, were you born and brought up in Virginia? Is that where you're from, or is it where you live now? Right.
Yes, ma'am. I was born and brought up in Virginia. I moved around a lot because of my situation with my parents, but I was born and mostly raised in Virginia.
Right. And what does that mean? I mean, we'd love to know a little bit more about you as a person, as a human being, before you've got all these honors and, accolades.
Yes, ma'am. So I grew up without a father, and my mom fought drug addiction and alcoholism. And so as a result, when I say we, I mean my siblings and myself, we would end up homeless at times and find ourselves just moving around. And there was one time where my siblings and myself, we ended up staying in a boarded up house because our mother would just leave us for days. And we ended up in foster care. I was taken to emergency foster care at the age of 9. And I stayed in emergency foster care until I aged out at age 21. And so when I found myself there, I just developed an attitude of, I don't care. Nobody cares for me. I hate my life. I was suicidal, even at a young age. But it was my fourth grade teacher that planted a seed within me, because I was taken from her class abruptly. But she planted that seed in me, and before she let social services take me, she whispered in my ear, she said, Anthony, everything is going to be all right. And so from there, once I entered in the system, I found myself going downward. But this particular educator, she somehow found me while I was in the system, and she was able to have a face-to-face conversation with me. And she just said, Anthony, I need you to grab hold of all of your anger and your bitterness and your hatred towards this world and your parents and make something of yourself. So she planted that seed, and from her planting that seed, I began to change my mentality, and I picked my grades up. I stopped getting suspended. My senior year, I ended up being in the top 20% of my graduating class with the 3.8 GPA. I had learned how to advocate for myself. And so I would go to guidance every single day and fill out scholarships and write essays. So I was the second person in my graduating class to have the most scholarships. So I put my own self through college with scholarships and with loans and grants. And my senior year, my mom died, and I wanted to quit. But my fourth grade teacher contacted me, and she allowed me to be vulnerable. She allowed me to cry. She allowed me to tell her where my headspace was. Then she asked me the question. She said, what do you need? And I said, her name is Mrs. Doretta Wilson. And I told her that it was my senior year, and I was ready to start student teaching. I didn't have a car, and Miss Wilson picked me up every single day, and she took me to my student teaching placement before she went to be at school herself. And when I first started my career, I went back to that same elementary school I was taken from, and I was teaching 3rd grade, and Miss Wilson was still teaching 4th grade.
Oh, there's just so much you've just said here, Anthony, that I want to make sure the listeners and I have actually captured all the different stories that you have just shared. I just want to go back a little bit. So at the age of 9, you said you were taken over by foster carers, you and your siblings. So from 0 to 9, you were living technically with your mother and your siblings, but your mother was she a drug addict? That's correct.
That's correct.
And so there wasn't any what we would call normal parenting. You didn't have a dad, and your mum was not really there for you to say, hi, son, have you got your school uniform? Have you got your lunch? Have you had your breakfast? None of the expected things that other children of your age would have been having at that time.
Correct.
And then eventually you were taken into foster care from the age of 9 until 21, until you became an adult.
Yes, ma'am.
And so let's just go back to 9, and you're going into foster care, or 9.5, 10. And what are you feeling at this point? You don't believe in the world. Is that what you were saying?
I'm sorry, could you repeat, because it kind of went out?
I said, when you went into foster care at the age of 9,
yes, ma'am,
your faith and belief in the world was not there at all because of your life from 0 to 9. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so what were you feeling at that point? Can you tell us a little bit more?
At that point, when I was taken in the middle of my school day in front of all of my peers, I was feeling embarrassed. I had so many questions running through my head all at the same time, like, what's wrong with me? How come my parents don't want me? This is embarrassing. I hate my life. I wish I was dead. All of those thoughts were running through my head at that particular moment. And my fourth grade teacher was the one who kind of settled my thoughts and my train of thinking in that moment while standing with social services when she whispered in my ear that everything was going to be all right.
And that is so powerful, isn't it, Anthony? And I think of your fourth grade teacher having the incredible presence of mind to say to you, it's going to be all right. But why? What was it within you? Because we're talking about your unconscious biases. So when you were standing there in front of those social workers, at that point, your instinct was, life is bad. There is no point. I'm not going to achieve anything. Nobody's there for me. And much more than that. And then one person says something into your ear. What is it about you that made you think differently and start believing in that one phrase and one sentence?
I did not want to grow up to be like my parents. I didn't want to grow up to be like them. I didn't want to do drugs. I never wanted to drink alcohol because I saw the effects that it had on my mom. I wanted to be a man that was present, a man of character and of integrity. And so I wanted to finish school because neither one of my parents actually graduated high school. So I wanted to change that narrative.
And you felt it within you. I mean, it was your instinct, wasn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Because you had no role models. You had nowhere to look other than one fourth grade teacher whispering in your ear, Anthony, it's going to be all right. That was it.
Yes, ma'am.
And so what were you saying to yourself then? When you were studying, so fast forward, you're 10, 11, 12, 13. We all know, because you're a school teacher, of what it's like for young boys when they get to their teenage years and hormones are, kicking in and they're all over the place. How did you manage to manage yourself?
Besides my faith in God, I just was determined to stay focused no matter what. And I knew that I had a dream, and my dream was to become a teacher. And so I focused on making sure that I had the grades to get to college, and making sure that I was quote unquote smart enough. And so I was called names and stuff in school. However, I didn't allow that to um, affect me because I knew my worth. I was starting to know my worth and starting to follow my dream. Dr. Seuss wrote a book, and it's entitled "Oh, the Places You'll Go." And just the title of that book helped me to realize that if I stay focused, I can go far in life. And so that was the fire behind why I decided to stay focused no matter what.
So a book and your self-belief and your faith in God, that's what was supporting you. And of course, all the places you'll go, we're talking about a children's book because you read this as a child. Because
Yes,
obviously Dr. Seuss, I mean, all of us who have children, including me, we've read Dr. Seuss to our children. So how did you even have access to this book? Because I don't want to take anything for granted in your upbringing, Anthony.
yes, ma'am. So I remembered the book when I was at Schoolfield before I was taken away. There was this librarian. Her name is Miss Cindy Blair. She's passed away now, but she would read to us. And that was the one book that I remembered the most. And basically, Dr. Seuss is saying things about how you can go places when you read books. And but I took it another way. I took it personal, as if you can go anywhere in this world that you want to go if you dream. And so my dream was to become a teacher, and I would play school every single day. and I could go places in my mind, although I was in foster care, although I was not having the best situation with my life. I began to dream, and I would play school every day. And when I would play school, it would take me away from foster care. It would take me away from the abuse. It would take me away from the neglect. It would take me away from the feelings of wishing that I was dead. And so playing school was my safe place. And so I just realized that I could go anywhere if I just dream.
And that's very powerful to have that realization within you. And then of course, fast forward a few more years and you met the lovely Mrs. Wilson. And what did she do? How did she support you to get to the next stage of your successful career?
So um she once she found me when I was in the system, she was determined not to lose the connection. So she would call me, she would check on me, she would talk with my foster mother. She would make sure that I was on the right track and studying, and she would hold me accountable. She would pick me up um, during my teenage years. She would pick me up for church, and I would go to church with her, and she would have conversations with me in the car and just telling me that she believes in me and I could do it. And all of those talks just helped me to keep going. And she's just always been there. Even to this day, I can pick up the phone and call her, and she'll talk to me and she'll give me advice. And um, she's just always been there.
And so, Mrs. Wilson, I think we need to all shout out people listening all over the world, because not everybody has a Mrs. Wilson in their lives.
Sure.
Because there's you who's done what you need to do to support your own self, your own challenging your own unconscious biases, your thoughts, your feelings, you said you were even suicidal at one point when you were young. And then you have wonderful people like your fourth grade teacher, like your library teacher, and of course, not library teacher, your librarian. And of course, Mrs. Wilson, you don't have a car. She says, I'll drive you. And that's extremely fortuitous. But tell us more, Anthony, and perhaps you want to share something else.
About, you want to know more about Miss Wilson or more
About you and your stories.
Okay. So since we are talking about unconscious biases, a couple of years ago, I was teaching fifth grade, and my principal had informed me of receiving a new student, and I was excited. I was like, yes, I get to impact another life. And the day that this new student showed up, in my mind, after I saw the new student, I began to have those unconscious biases. I began to have those microaggressions because the student was Hispanic. And I started saying within myself, I can't teach him. Like, oh, it's going to be harder to teach him because he's not going to understand any English. Like, I was having these conversations in my head, and until I had to do a temperature check on myself. And what I mean by temperature check, I mean that I had to tell myself, what are you doing? Like, all children can learn. Stop thinking like this. Get yourself together, and give this student what he needs so that he can be successful. And this student ended up being one of the top students in my class, made straight A's the entire time he was with me, understood all of the vocabulary. And so that helped me, just even being on my cultural competency team within my district.
That's amazing. But the point is, you had the presence of mind, Anthony, to just stop, isn't it? Because what we tend to do, human nature, you, me, our listeners, we look at somebody, we perceive them, and then we jump to conclusions, and our mind starts saying things to us, which was what was happening to you. It happens to me. It happens to so many of us all the time. But then what you were able to do is say stop. So you actually paused your thought process.
Yeah.
And that's what you call a temperature check. I love it. Hang on a minute. I'm going to take my own temperature check and say, this is not good. Let me think differently. And so it's almost like rewiring the thought process.
Yes, ma'am. Exactly.
So what made you do that? I mean, do you do that all the time these days?
I actually do. And it's because being on the team that trains other professionals to do temperature checks, and it trains other professionals to challenge themselves on their unconscious biases. Um, so I do it quite often because I don't want to be a hypocrite. And so I want to lead by example. And so that's kind of what helped me to pause in that moment, because I'm here in my training professionals and I'm doing the same thing I'm telling the professionals not to do. So wait a minute, let me think differently right at this moment. Like, no, all children can learn, regardless if they're Hispanic, white, black, purple, from another country, Asian. All children have the ability to learn. And so get yourself together. Like, I have to have those talks with myself at times, in order to help myself to grow.
And that's about, I love the fact that you're saying that, because you are still growing is what you're saying.
Yes, ma'am.
And so, earlier on, Anthony, you talked about the fact that when you are actually training your colleagues and you talk about unconscious bias and so on, and you talked about microaggressions. What does that mean to you?
So microaggressions are having those feelings that you don't realize you have until someone helps you to see them. For instance, there's this activity that we do in the training, and it's called a diverse world. And so we give everyone a cup, and we give everyone different colored beads. We give everyone a white bead for someone that's white. We give everyone a black bead for someone that's black, and a red bead will be like the outlier, like someone who's Hispanic or someone who's of another culture. And so we give them a list of questions, and they have to put a bead in their cup, so that at the end of the activity, they can see if their world is diverse or if they have just stuck with a certain culture. And so being able to see those, so questions like, put a bead in that represents the color of your doctor, or put a bead that represents the culture of your next door neighbor. Put a bead that represents the culture of which the school environment that you work at. And so it's able to help people to reflect, to see if their world is diverse, to see if they're open to other cultures. And it has caused professionals to look at themselves like, wow, I really did not know that that is what I was doing. I was just sticking to one culture. And it helps them to see, wow, I was really feeling this.
But what's interesting in what you're saying, Anthony, is that, we all unconsciously, this is our unconscious bias, just feel, it's called affinity bias, as I'm sure you know. We just
Yes.
stick with what we
What we do.
feel comfortable with. We like, you look like
Yes.
me, I look like you. We get each other, we understand each other. And we just do it instinctively, unconsciously. And so, especially for you, and I must ask that question. Now, you are black. Obviously, this is an audio recording. People
Yes.
don't know what you look like
Yes.
when they're going on to Apple or Spotify or Anchor or wherever they're listening. They're only hearing your voice. They know you live in Virginia. So what, you must have had your own unconscious biases where you only wanted to be amongst your own people in terms of visual sameness. So also, I mean, maybe that's not the case, but perhaps growing up in Virginia, alongside all the stresses and challenges that you were having because of your parents, maybe there was also blatant racism. I don't know. So how were you trying to manage those things to actually get above all of that and say, you know what, I'm diverse. I'm part of a diverse world, and I want to be in an inclusive world. What makes you do that? What made you do that?
Well, younger, I was not aware um, of things such as what we're talking about. So I didn't have the knowledge of microaggressions and unconscious biases until I became a professional. And so that is when things changed for me and helped me to grow and helped me to realize the different things. I've even had microaggressions towards my own self. And how did I do that? So I would tell myself things like, you can't win teacher of the year. You're the only Black person.
Mm.
You can't win teacher of the year. You're the only male teacher that's a finalist. You can't. So you can't win teacher of the year. You never had a father. I would have those conversations with my own self. And then I would once again have to do another temperature check and say, yo, wait a minute. You can be anything you want to become, regardless of your background. So stop selling yourself short. And so I was not made aware of microaggressions and the terminologies of unconscious biases until I became a professional, until I was put on the committee that trained other teachers. It helped me to grow, and it's still yet helping me to grow as an assistant principal now.
But in fact, I would say actually, you've already, I think, let yourself down a little bit, because I personally believe that even though you didn't know the words, you were already doing temperature checks at the age of 10, 11, 12, 15.
I can see that.
So you may not have known the words. You certainly
Right.
didn't know what microaggression meant, because these are words that we use in today's modern language. But you were there. You were doing your temperature checks. You were telling yourself, I am not going to be like everybody, like my parents. I am going to achieve. I am going to get a degree. I am going to be a teacher. I am going to believe in myself. I am not going to let Mrs. Wilson down, or I don't know, so many other things that you had
You're
begun
right.
to say, weren't you? So you know, there's an example, and I think it's remarkable that you have achieved as much as you have with your own, from an unconscious bias perspective, your own self-talk. You know, very simply put, we don't need to use big words like microaggression or unconscious bias. It's just about you changing the language in your own head. And that is
Yeah.
the power of what you have done.
Yes.
And we can all learn from that, Anthony. And I just wanted to, you know, for the listeners to appreciate that we all have challenges in our lives. And what we tend to do instinctively is wallow in those challenges. But
Mm-hmm.
what you did is metaphorically, you know, said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to slap myself out of it, and I'm going to get on with it.
Yes.
In
Yes.
fact, in fact, is there any last bit of advice that you would like to give all of us listeners?
Um, just be open to receive a new way of thinking and a new way of looking at things and a new perspective, because it will help you to grow as an individual. It'll help you to grow as a professional. Um, it, it will help you to be more inclusive in decision making. So just be more open, because you're able to affect more lives when you become open to knowing your microaggressions when doing those temperature checks. So I would say just be open and be willing to learn what you need to learn, so that you can be impactful and leave an imprint on other people's lives.
That's brilliant, Anthony. And what I thought I would do is I will just read out one line from Dr. Sewis's "Oh, the Places You'll Go," which so influenced you all those years ago. He says, "You won't lag behind because you'll have the speed. You'll pass the whole gang and you'll soon take the lead. Wherever you fly, you'll be the best of the best. Wherever you go, you will top all the rest." And that's
Wow.
exactly what you've done. So
Wow.
that's exactly what you've done. Anthony Swann, thank you so very much for sharing your powerful stories of unconscious bias with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Stories Seldom Told. I am Smitha Tharoor. It is you, the listener, that makes this podcast what it is. If you like this podcast, please do share. If any of you anywhere in the world feel that you have stories to share, please do connect with me on social media at Smitha Tharoor on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or on my company page, Tharoor Associates, on Facebook. We will be back next week.